You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. The Agile mindset forms the philosophical foundation of the PMI-ACP framework, shaping how teams make decisions, interact with one another, and adapt to change. Rather than being a set of rigid instructions, it represents a guiding orientation that consistently points practitioners toward adaptability, value delivery, and ethical responsibility under uncertainty. This mindset serves as a compass when trade-offs must be made in complex situations where information is incomplete and time is limited. For example, when a team must decide whether to extend scope or release earlier, the mindset prioritizes customer value and learning over rigid adherence to a predetermined plan. By cultivating this orientation, teams embed adaptability into their culture, allowing them to respond effectively to evolving demands. On the exam, Domain 1 questions often test whether candidates can apply mindset principles rather than rely solely on prescriptive processes. Values and principles provide the North Star of Agile practice. They turn trade-offs toward collaboration, learning, and customer value instead of inflexible compliance with plans. The Agile Manifesto's values, such as individuals and interactions over processes and tools, shape decisions by reminding teams of what truly matters. Principles extend these values into daily practice, emphasizing things like early delivery, frequent feedback, and sustainable pace. For instance, when a team struggles between writing extensive documentation or engaging directly with users, the principle of customer collaboration guides them toward interaction. On the exam, questions often present scenarios where multiple answers look plausible. Recognizing which option reflects alignment with values and principles ensures that candidates select not just a technically correct answer, but the one that embodies Agile philosophy. Empiricism lies at the heart of the Agile mindset. It is the commitment to transparency, inspection, and adaptation in place of long-range prediction. Agile practitioners accept that certainty is rare in complex projects and instead rely on evidence and feedback to guide progress. For example, rather than locking down requirements months in advance, a team might deliver a minimal increment and gather stakeholder reactions before deciding what to build next. Empiricism encourages humility, acknowledging that plans are hypotheses to be tested rather than truths to be enforced. On the exam, scenarios often involve teams clinging to forecasts or assumptions. The Agile answer usually emphasizes empirical adjustment changing course when data suggests it, because agility is defined by responsiveness to reality, not stubborn adherence to initial expectations. Customer centricity ensures that Agile work is oriented around user outcomes rather than internal measures of productivity. This means aligning priorities with the real-world impact of the product or service, rather than focusing on the number of features shipped. For example, a team that delivers 10 new functions but fails to improve user satisfaction has achieved outputs but not outcomes. Customer centricity demands that teams measure success in terms of customer benefit, business results, or experience improvement. This orientation helps guide trade-offs. When resources are limited, the work most likely to create customer value should be prioritized. On the exam, customer centricity often appears in scenarios where stakeholders pressure teams toward vanity metrics. The Agile response usually emphasizes real impact, reinforcing that outcomes always outweigh mere activity. A learning orientation is essential to agility, framing projects as opportunities for discovery rather than exercises in flawless execution. Teams normalize experimentation, safe-to-fail probes, and rapid synthesis of lessons. For example, launching a pilot feature to a subset of users allows a team to test hypotheses with low risk. Even failed experiments provide data that reduce uncertainty and accelerate future progress. This orientation reduces the fear of failure by reframing it as an integral part of learning. On the exam, scenarios about how to proceed in uncertain or ambiguous contexts often test whether candidates understand this principle. The correct agile approach usually emphasizes running small experiments, capturing feedback quickly, and adjusting. Agility thrives when learning is embraced as the path to improvement, not avoided as a sign of weakness. Respect for people recognizes that engaged, motivated individuals drive creativity, throughput, and quality. It means granting autonomy, cultivating mastery, and ensuring that work connects to purpose. For example, a team that is trusted to organize its own tasks and reflect on its own improvement is more likely to innovate and deliver sustainably. Respect also means protecting people from burnout by avoiding unrealistic demands. On the exam, scenarios about leadership choices often hinge on whether respect is shown to individuals. The correct answer typically involves empowering teams, valuing input, and creating an environment where people feel ownership of outcomes. This principle embodies the belief that processes and tools only create value when people are energized and supported in applying them. Psychological safety is the cultural condition that allows respect for people to be lived out in practice. It is the climate in which team members feel free to voice dissent, raise risks, or admit mistakes without fear of reprisal. In psychologically unsafe teams, issues remain hidden until they become crises. By contrast, safe teams surface problems early, enabling timely intervention. For example, a developer who feels safe will admit to struggling with a task, allowing teammates to help before deadlines are missed. On the exam, psychological safety often underpins questions about conflict, communication, or team health. The agile response usually favors creating openness and removing blame, recognizing that candor is essential for adaptability and resilience. Safety is the foundation upon which continuous improvement is built. Transparency provides the mechanism by which psychological safety and empiricism function. It is the routine exposure of work, risks, and decisions to stakeholders and team members alike. Tools like visible task boards, burn-up charts, and backlog refinement sessions are practical enablers of transparency, but the principle extends beyond mechanics. Transparency requires a cultural willingness to reveal the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. For example, sharing incomplete increments at a sprint review invites feedback that prevents later disappointment. On the exam, transparency often appears in questions about stakeholder communication or visibility of progress. The correct answers typically involve making work and risks visible, enabling informed decisions. Agile thrives on shared understanding, and transparency is the lens through which that understanding is achieved. Inspect and adapt loops institutionalize reflection, ensuring that transparency is not passive but actionable. These deliberate, time-boxed events, such as retrospectives, convert observations into concrete changes in process, scope, or approach. For instance, a team that notices recurring delays in testing may adapt by increasing automation. Without regular loops, learning remains sporadic and reactive. Inspect and adapt ensures that improvement is intentional and continuous. On the exam, candidates may face questions about when and how teams should respond to issues. The agile answer usually involves creating or reinforcing loops that allow problems to be addressed systematically rather than ignored or patched. The mindset of constant improvement is not optional but embedded in the very rhythm of agile practice. Sustainable pace is a principle that counters the illusion of productivity created by overwork. While overtime may temporarily increase output, it erodes quality, morale, and long-term throughput. Agile teams commit to a pace that can be maintained indefinitely, protecting both performance and well-being. For example, a team that burns out after months of overtime delivers less overall than one that works steadily. Sustainable pace is not a luxury but a necessity for quality delivery. On the exam, scenarios often test whether candidates recognize the false economy of heroic effort. The agile response usually involves reinforcing sustainable cadence and adjusting scope rather than overloading teams. Agility is about endurance and consistency, not bursts of unsustainable intensity. Cross-functional collaboration ensures that teams have the skills needed to deliver value without constant handoffs. By integrating developers, testers, analysts, and domain experts into one team, work flows more smoothly and knowledge spreads more quickly. For example, a cross-functional team can refine, build, test, and release within a sprint, reducing dependencies and delays. Collaboration fosters faster learning, as diverse perspectives improve problem-solving. On the exam, cross-functionality often underpins questions about reducing bottlenecks or improving throughput. The correct agile response typically emphasizes building teams with all necessary competencies and fostering close collaboration. Agile delivery is not just about individuals working efficiently, but about collective integration of expertise to accelerate value. Outcome over output reinforces that agile delivery should be measured by benefits achieved, not by activity completed. An outcome might be customers complete purchases 20% faster, whereas an output is add 3 new checkout features. Outputs do not guarantee outcomes. Only careful alignment ensures real impact. Focusing on outcomes prevents vanity productivity, where teams appear busy but produce little value. On the exam, candidates often face questions about prioritization. The agile answer usually emphasizes outcomes, ensuring that work aligns with customer and business goals. This mindset shift is one of the hardest but most powerful in agile practice, as it redefines success in terms of impact rather than sheer output volume. Systems thinking expands the agile mindset to include the whole ecosystem in which work occurs. It prevents local optimizations that inadvertently harm overall performance. For example, a team may increase its velocity by cutting quality corners, but this creates rework and delays downstream. Systems thinking encourages practitioners to examine interdependencies, feedback loops, and unintended consequences before acting. On the exam, candidates may face questions about whether to optimize team metrics or consider broader flow. The agile response usually emphasizes the systemic perspective, recognizing that sustainable value requires optimizing the whole. Systems thinking aligns with Agile's collaborative ethos, reminding practitioners that every decision has ripple effects across the product, the organization, and the customer experience. Ethical delivery ensures that speed and adaptability never come at the expense of fairness, privacy, or safety. Agile emphasizes delivering value quickly, but that value must be responsible. For example, rushing a product to market without considering data privacy may deliver short-term gains but cause long-term harm. Ethical delivery requires attention to compliance, security, and stakeholder trust. On the exam, ethical delivery often appears in questions about balancing pressure for speed with responsibility. The correct agile response usually emphasizes fairness, transparency, and accountability. This principle reinforces that agility is not just about effectiveness, but also about integrity. Delivering value means ensuring that what is delivered is beneficial, safe, and aligned with professional ethics. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Decision heuristics provide simple, principle-based rules for acting when information is incomplete or ambiguous. Rather than pausing indefinitely to gather perfect data, Agile teams use heuristics like opt for the smallest valuable step or deliver something inspectable quickly. These shortcuts accelerate progress while still aligning with Agile values. For example, when unsure how to prioritize features, a team may decide to deliver the one most likely to generate immediate feedback, even if imperfect. On the exam, candidates may encounter scenarios where time pressure and uncertainty collide. The Agile answer usually highlights using heuristics to keep moving, showing that momentum is sustained not by certainty, but by disciplined, value-driven approximations. Heuristics embody agility's balance between action and reflection, enabling continuous discovery without paralysis. A bias toward feedback ensures that teams resolve debates with evidence rather than prolonged speculation. Instead of lengthy discussions about the best approach, Agile practice prefers early, small experiments that produce real data. For instance, a team debating user interface designs might release 2 variants to a limited audience and measure response. This bias toward evidence reduces the cost of mistakes and accelerates learning. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios where multiple stakeholders disagree about a solution. The Agile response usually emphasizes generating feedback through working increments rather than prolonged negotiation. A feedback bias reflects Agility's empirical heart. Knowledge is not manufactured through opinion, but discovered through exposure to reality. Change responsiveness defines Agility's ability to embrace evolving understanding without clinging to sunk costs. Plans are necessary, but they are not sacred. Agile teams revisit priorities regularly, adapting to new information or shifting customer needs. For example, if market feedback reveals that a feature is unnecessary, an Agile team will pivot quickly, even if design work has already been invested. On the exam, responsiveness often appears in scenarios where stakeholders demand adherence to original commitments despite new insights. The Agile answer usually emphasizes revisiting and revising plans in light of evidence. Responsiveness is not chaos. It is structured adaptability, ensuring that effort continues to align with outcomes rather than outdated assumptions. Agile's risk posture differs from traditional management by accepting uncertainty while actively managing exposure. Instead of trying to eliminate all risk up front, Agile teams reduce exposure through practices like slicing work into small increments, buffering critical paths, and designing fast rollback options. For example, releasing a feature behind a toggle allows risk to be tested with minimal impact. On the exam, candidates may encounter questions about risk in ambiguous or pressured environments. The correct Agile response usually involves managing risk iteratively, reducing potential harm while still moving forward. This posture reflects the reality of complex environments. Uncertainty is inevitable, but careful structuring of delivery makes it manageable and less damaging. Collaborative problem-solving reinforces that the best solutions often emerge from structured group dialogue rather than isolated decision-making. Agile facilitation helps separate interests from positions, encouraging exploration of underlying needs. For instance, when a stakeholder insists on a specific feature, the team may uncover that the real need is for faster reporting, which could be solved in simpler ways. Collaboration maximizes shared value, producing solutions that balance technical feasibility and stakeholder goals. On the exam, scenarios about conflict or competing demands often hinge on recognizing the importance of facilitation and collaboration. The Agile response usually favors structured, inclusive processes that seek alignment rather than unilateral decisions. This approach reinforces Agile's philosophy that diverse perspectives fuel stronger outcomes. Conflict within an Agile mindset is seen as signal rather than threat. Healthy disagreement surfaces assumptions and alternative perspectives that may otherwise remain hidden. The key is respectful challenge and curiosity rather than destructive confrontation. For example, a developer questioning whether backlog priorities truly align with outcomes may reveal misalignment that benefits from reconsideration. On the exam, scenarios about team conflict often test whether candidates can distinguish between harmful discord and constructive debate. The Agile response usually involves encouraging open discussion and addressing issues transparently. Viewing conflict as data rather than danger fosters resilience, aligning with Agile's emphasis on transparency and adaptation. Teams that engage conflict productively improve their decision quality and innovation capacity. Empowerment and accountability operate as paired expectations within Agile teams. Empowerment grants individuals and teams decision latitude, enabling them to act swiftly and creatively. Accountability ensures that these decisions are transparent and followed through responsibly. For instance, a team empowered to select its own tools must also be accountable for maintaining quality and integration. On the exam, empowerment scenarios often ask whether leaders should make decisions for the team or allow autonomy. The correct Agile answer typically favors empowerment, provided accountability mechanisms are clear. This balance reflects Agile's principle of trust paired with responsibility. Teams thrive when they feel ownership of outcomes, but true ownership requires visibility and follow-through, preventing autonomy from drifting into neglect. Mindset anti-patterns are recognizable failure modes, where teams go through the motions without embodying Agile values. Examples include cargo cult rituals, where ceremonies are performed mechanically, or output obsession, where teams equate productivity with value. These patterns signal drift from Agile's purpose. For example, a team that holds retrospectives but never adapts behavior is engaging in ritual, not reflection. On the exam, candidates may encounter scenarios where practices look agile but lack substance. The correct answers usually involve identifying the anti-pattern and steering back toward principles. Recognizing anti-patterns allows practitioners to prevent stagnation, reminding them that agility is a mindset, not a checklist. Vigilance against these patterns preserves authenticity in Agile practice. Mindset in regulated contexts requires harmonizing adaptability with compliance. Regulations demand traceability, documentation, and validation. But these do not preclude agility. Instead, Agile teams adapt by integrating compliance into increments and evidence collection. For example, a team building medical software may validate requirements incrementally, providing regulators with documented proof of conformity while still iterating. On the exam, scenarios about balancing compliance and agility often test whether candidates can integrate both rather than treat them as opposites. The Agile response usually involves finding ways to meet regulatory needs through incremental, evidence-based delivery. This mindset emphasizes that adaptability is compatible with responsibility, and compliance can be achieved without sacrificing responsiveness or flow. Remote and distributed collaboration requires an intentional mindset, as distance can weaken cohesion and communication. Agile teams adapt by establishing explicit rituals, clarifying agreements, and using tools that support visibility. For example, a distributed team may adopt structured daily check-ins and share digital boards to replicate transparency. The absence of co-location makes implicit communication insufficient. Everything must be more deliberate. On the exam, scenarios about distributed teams often test whether candidates can recognize the need for explicit agreements and regular interaction. The Agile answer usually emphasizes clarity and ritual over assumption. A distributed mindset accepts that cohesion is possible but must be cultivated actively, not left to chance. A culture of continuous improvement is essential for sustaining agility over time. This culture encourages small, routine changes that compound into meaningful advances in flow, quality, and morale. For example, a team might experiment with shortening stand-ups, adopt a new testing tool, or adjust backlog refinement frequency. Each small improvement creates momentum, reinforcing the belief that change is normal and expected. On the exam, improvement culture often appears in scenarios about retrospectives or process changes. The correct Agile response usually involves experimenting with incremental adjustments rather than imposing sweeping reforms. Continuous improvement mirrors Kaizen principles, reminding practitioners that agility is sustained not through transformation projects, but through everyday commitment to progress. Leadership alignment ensures that sponsors, managers, and executives model the same values expected of teams. When leaders say one thing but reward another, for instance, emphasizing sustainable pace but praising overtime, teams receive mixed signals. Alignment requires leaders to remove systemic impediments, provide resources, and reinforce Agile values consistently. For example, leaders who prioritize learning and feedback create conditions where teams can experiment without fear. On the exam, leadership alignment often appears in scenarios about organizational culture. The correct Agile response usually emphasizes the importance of systemic support, not just team-level practice. Agile cannot thrive in isolation. It requires coherence between what teams are asked to do and what leaders demonstrate through their own behaviors. Stakeholder partnership emphasizes that stakeholders are not passive recipients of output, but active collaborators from the very beginning. Agile practice involves stakeholders in backlog refinement, sprint reviews, and prioritization, ensuring that feedback shapes decisions early. This reduces the risk of late-stage surprises and builds shared ownership. For example, a stakeholder engaged in early iterations may redirect priorities before large amounts of effort are wasted. On the exam, scenarios about stakeholder engagement often test whether candidates can identify the importance of partnership rather than distant approval. The Agile response usually emphasizes early, ongoing involvement. Agile recognizes that value is co-created, and partnership transforms stakeholders from evaluators into collaborators. Mindset measurement involves both qualitative and quantitative indicators that reflect cultural health. Metrics like engagement levels, flow stability, and escaped defect rates provide tangible signals, while observations about openness, collaboration, and psychological safety offer qualitative insight. No single measure suffices. Together they create a holistic view. For example, a team with stable throughput but low engagement may not be sustainably agile. On the exam, mindset measurement may appear in questions about evaluating team or cultural health. The correct Agile response usually involves combining hard data with soft signals, ensuring that measurement reflects reality rather than numbers alone. Agile recognizes that culture is as measurable as performance, and mindset health determines long-term resilience. In conclusion, Domain 1 emphasizes that the Agile mindset is not abstract philosophy but lived behavior. It guides decisions through heuristics, fosters feedback and responsiveness, and balances empowerment with accountability. It addresses risk with iterative safeguards, embraces conflict as signal, and sustains improvement as cultural norm. In regulated or distributed contexts, it adapts without losing integrity, harmonizing compliance with agility and distance with cohesion. Leadership alignment and stakeholder partnership ensure that values scale beyond teams, while measurement provides visibility into cultural health. On the exam, candidates will succeed not by memorizing rituals but by reasoning from principles. Domain 1 teaches that agility resides in choices and behaviors that turn values into everyday practice, enabling adaptability and ethical delivery under real-world constraints. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.